When were you married?
Pardon?
When were you married?
Well, we leave our personal questions out of this, sir.
You swipe right on someone 10 years younger, and people call it a red flag. But back in Hollywood's golden age, some of the biggest stars weren't just dating younger. They were marrying teenagers. We're talking about men in their 50s walking down the aisle with girls who couldn't even vote yet. Behind the glitz and glamour were relationships that would spark outrage today. Some ended in mysterious deaths. Others involved secret pregnancies and careers built on silence. What you're about to hear will change how you see some of cinema's most beloved icons forever. Jerry Lee Lewis and Myra Gale Brown, 22 and 13. Jerry Lee Lewis wasn't just a rock and roll pioneer. He was a man whose career collapsed in a single day because of who he brought on tour. In 1958, Lewis arrived in the UK riding high on hits like Great Balls of Fire. But reporters at the airport noticed something strange. A very young girl was traveling with him, and she wasn't just tagging along. She was his wife. Her name was Myra Gale Brown, and Lewis told the press she was 15. That alone would have been scandalous enough, but he was lying. Myra was actually 13 years old. And it gets worse. She was his cousin. The British press went wild, digging deeper into the story. That's when they uncovered another bombshell. Lewis wasn't even divorced from his previous wife when he married Myra. He'd committed bigamy. The outrage was immediate and brutal. Concerts were canceled. His tour was cut short after just 3 shows. Despite everything, Lewis and Myra stayed married for 13 years. She was 26 when she finally filed for divorce, citing abuse and infidelity. By then, she'd spent her entire adolescence married to a man who'd turned her into one of the most infamous figures in music history. Errol Flynn and Beverly Adland, 48 and 15. Errol Flynn had a reputation long before the accusations surfaced. He once allegedly said, "I like my whiskey old and my women young." But in 1942, that preference landed him in court. 2 girls came forward with accusations. Betty Hansen was 17. Peggy Satterlee was 15. Satterlee's testimony was particularly damning. She said Flynn had a nickname for her. He called her JB, short for jailbait. He knew exactly how old she was, and he didn't care. The trial became a media spectacle. Fans lined up outside the courthouse to support him. His lawyer stacked the jury with 9 women, banking on Flynn's charm and star power. And it worked. Flynn was acquitted and walked out a free man while the girls faded into obscurity. But the story doesn't end there. Years later, Flynn started a relationship with Beverly Adland when she was 15. In a 1996 interview, decades after Flynn's death, Adland revealed their first encounter wasn't consensual. What it showed was a pattern, a deliberate, repeated pattern that Hollywood chose to ignore because he was too valuable to lose. William Randolph Hearst and Marion Davies, 53 and 19. Not every scandalous relationship involved courtrooms or tabloid explosions. Some were dressed up as respectable romances, celebrated by the press and admired by fans who had no idea what was really happening behind closed doors. Take William Randolph Hearst and Marion Davies. When they met in 1916, Hearst was already one of the most powerful men in America, a newspaper magnate whose influence could make or break careers with a single headline. Davies was a chorus girl performing in the Ziegfeld Follies, talented and charming, just 19 years old. Hearst was 53. He showered her with gifts, phone calls, and attention that quickly turned into something more. But there was a problem. Hearst was married, and his devout Catholic wife refused to grant him a divorce. So Hearst and Davies did what powerful men in Hollywood often did. They lived together anyway, hiding in plain sight for over 3 decades. Hearst built her lavish homes and cast her in films, using his media empire to promote her career. But his obsession went darker than that. When he traveled, he hired private detectives to follow her every move. He needed to know where she was, who she was with, what she was doing. Control masked as devotion. Despite everything, Davies stuck by him. She even loaned Hearst $1 million when his empire was crumbling financially. But when he died in 1951, after more than 30 years together, she wasn't allowed to attend his funeral. His legal wife made sure of that. The pattern repeats itself. Older men, younger women, and a need for control that went far beyond love. Charlie Chaplin and Una O'Neill, 54 and 18. Charlie Chaplin is remembered as a comedic genius and pioneer of silent film, but his personal life revealed a disturbing pattern that couldn't be ignored. He married 4 times, and 3 of those wives were in their teens when they walked down the aisle. His first marriage was to actress Mildred Harris when she was 16 and he was 29. They married after a pregnancy scare that turned out to be false, and the union lasted just 2 years. His second marriage followed a similar pattern with actress Lita Gray, resulting in a bitter and highly publicized divorce that became one of the biggest scandals of the 1920s. His third wife, Paulette Goddard, was 26 when they married in 1936. She was the oldest of his wives, and the marriage was the most private, lasting until 1942. Then came Una O'Neill. She was 18 years old when she married Chaplin in 1943. He was 54. The age gap alone was staggering, but what made it even more shocking was who her father was. Eugene O'Neill, the famous playwright, was the same age as Chaplin. When Eugene found out his daughter was marrying a man his own age, he disowned her completely. He never spoke to her again. Despite the controversy, this final marriage was reportedly Chaplin's happiest. They had 8 children together and remained married until his death in 1977. But the pattern throughout his life was undeniable. Multiple marriages to much younger women, with age gaps that would be considered unacceptable today. One biographer even suggested that Chaplin may have been part of the inspiration for the character in Vladimir Nabokov's controversial novel, Lolita. That's the legacy underneath the bowler hat and cane. Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, 45 and 20. When Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall met on the set of To Have and Have Not, it was supposed to be a fairy tale. Their chemistry lit up the screen. But Bacall was still a teenager, barely 20 years old. Bogart was 45. His wife, Mayo Method, had once stabbed him during a jealous rage. When he secured his divorce in 1945, they married immediately. A 25-year age gap that made headlines, but the press celebrated them. But peel back the romance, and the cracks show. Bogart didn't want an actress. He wanted a traditional wife. Bacall's career took a hit because of it. The roles dried up. Both had emotional affairs during the marriage. When Bogart died in 1957, Bacall was only 32 and already a widow. She'd spent her entire youth with a man a generation older. Hollywood sold this as the ultimate love story, but it's hard to ignore what she gave up and what he expected in return. Carlo Ponti and Sophia Loren, 38 and 16. Sophia Loren once described it as love at first sight. She was sitting at a table with friends at a beauty contest in Rome when Carlo Ponti, a film producer serving as one of the judges, sent her a note encouraging her to compete. She placed second, but that wasn't what mattered. It was the beginning of a relationship that would span decades. Loren was 16 years old. Ponti was 38. He wasn't just older. He was established, influential, and had the ability to make or break careers in Italian cinema. Loren was a teenager with dreams of stardom. Their relationship remained professional at first, but by the time she was 19, it had turned romantic. The complication? Ponti had a wife, and in 1950s Italy, divorce was virtually impossible. In 1957, they attempted to work around Italian law through a Mexican court by proxy. Italy didn't recognize the divorce, but did recognize the new marriage. That made Ponti legally a bigamist, and the scandal threatened both their reputations. To avoid prosecution, they annulled the Mexican marriage and eventually became French citizens. In 1966, nearly a decade after their first attempt, they finally married legally in France. The relationship lasted over 40 years, until Ponti's death in 2007. Lorraine became one of the greatest actresses of her generation. On the surface, it's a story of perseverance and devotion. But the beginning tells a different tale. A teenage girl at a beauty pageant and a middle-aged producer with all the power. John Wayne and Pilar Palete, 47 and 24. Some relationships didn't implode in scandal. They lasted years, even decades, but longevity doesn't mean they were healthy. John Wayne met Pilar Palete in 1952 while filming in Peru. She was a young actress and sparks flew immediately, but Wayne was still married, trapped in what both sides described as a toxic situation. When Palete became pregnant, she made a devastating choice. She had an abortion, worried about the scandal and how it might damage Wayne's carefully crafted public image. The man came first, her body, her choice, but the pressure made the decision for her. When Wayne's divorce was finally finalized, he and Palete married quietly in 1954. He was 47 years old. She was 24. In interviews, Palete described Wayne as youthful and energetic, insisting the age gap didn't feel significant. They had 3 children together and stayed married for 25 years. That sounds like a success story until you learn the reality. For the last 6 years of their marriage, they lived separately. And when Wayne died in 1979, Palete wasn't included in his will. His lawyer claimed she'd already received a financial settlement, but the message was clear. After decades together, after sacrificing her career and her choices for him, she was left out. The power dynamic was always there from the beginning. Bing Crosby and Katharine Grant, 53 and 23. Bing Crosby was already a legend when he met Katharine Grant, a crooner, an actor, a cultural icon, and a widower. Grant was a fresh-faced 23-year-old actress just getting her start in Hollywood. He was 53. Their courtship was long and full of delays that Grant would later recall with a mix of humor and frustration. "We kept planning to get married, but then he'd get a kidney stone or something dreadful," she said in an interview years later. "It's almost funny, except it highlights how much she was waiting on him. Her life on hold, while he dealt with his health issues and his hesitations about committing again. They finally married in 1957 in a secret Las Vegas ceremony. Crosby, ever the private man, was so determined to avoid the press that he gave reporters the wrong church address. The 30-year age gap didn't seem to trouble Grant, at least not publicly. She later said, "By the time we married, I realized I could survive without him, and he realized he didn't want to survive without me. That's a good attitude to enter a marriage with." They had 3 children together and stayed married until Crosby's death in 1977. 20 years of marriage that, on paper, looked like it worked. But the foundation was built on an undeniable power imbalance. He was an established star with all the control. She was young, waiting, and willing to put her life on pause for a man who could take his time deciding if he wanted her. These weren't just age gaps. They were about power, control, and careers built on silence. Some married teenagers. Others pursued girls they'd known since childhood. The ones celebrated as grand romances often had darker undercurrents, with sacrificed careers and forced choices. Today, we'd call much of this what it actually was: exploitation. But back then, Hollywood wrapped it in glamour and sold it as love. The stars were too valuable to lose, and the industry protected them at every turn. The golden age of Hollywood had a shadow that stretched far beyond the sound stages. The next time you see one of these classic films, remember what was happening when the cameras stopped rolling. What makes these stories even more disturbing is how normalized they were. Fans defended their favorite stars. The media celebrated these unions as fairy tales. Studio executives protected their investments, silencing anyone who dared to speak up. The younger partners, many of them barely out of their teens, had little choice but to accept the imbalance. Their careers depended on it. Their futures were tied to men who could make or break them with a single phone call. Some stayed for decades, sacrificing their youth and ambitions. Others tried to leave and found themselves erased from the narrative entirely. These are just the stories we know about. How many more remain buried in studio archives, hidden behind legal settlements, or lost to history because the victims never had the platform to speak? The pattern was clear then, and it should be clear to us now. If you found this eye-opening and want to see more untold stories from Hollywood's past, make sure to subscribe. Because the truth behind the glamour is always more complicated than the movies would have you believe.